So you don't think an attack is in his mind, or US joining Israel? You don't think that's in his
the wording
mind?
of the G7 statement, I think, speaks for itself. And I sat next to the president for that 2-hour.
In politics, mistakes can be corrected. But what happened to Keir Starmer last week wasn't a slip. It was a total systems failure. One exposed not just by his own words, but by his critics and even seasoned journalists. Starmer's foreign policy weakness was laid bare for all to see. This wasn't just poor messaging. It was a complete collapse of leadership, and it came at the worst possible time. But what does this mean for Britain's future?
The map.
Let's find out.
I don't think they had any choice at all. I'm pleased that the Americans have intervened. Generally, I'm against military interventions. I was vehemently opposed to what happened in Libya. I was strongly opposed to what happened in Iraq 20 years ago. And I've always thought that going for regime change was a really very dangerous policy, because you don't know what is going to follow. In this case, this Iranian regime, brutal, evil, they've been there for 4 decades, and I still find it actually quite difficult to believe that Obama, the European Union, and of course the ever reliable British Foreign Office got all of this completely and utterly wrong with the JCPOA agreement just over a decade ago, which just simply allowed tens of billions of dollars to be freed up for the Iranians, which they've used to fund the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, and anybody else that intends to cause grief. So I hope and believe that the American reports are right, and that Iran no longer has nuclear capability, and we'll see what comes.
Nigel Farage delivered what could have been a moment of contradiction, but instead revealed surprising clarity. He condemned the disastrous regime change wars in Iraq and Libya, yet backed America's latest move against Iran. Why? Because he grasped something Starmer does not. Iran isn't just another country. It's a theocratic regime bankrolling global chaos. Farage laid out his case with precision. Meanwhile, Starmer stayed invisible. No strategy, no strong words for Tehran, no recognition of the threats Farage described. In that moment, Farage spoke like a statesman. Starmer came across as an empty page.
Perhaps the only surprise is the only person in the country who didn't seem to know the Americans were about to do something was the British Prime Minister himself, who appears to be totally dumbfounded by the whole thing, and says there should be de-escalation, whilst in the next sentence saying Iran should not have nuclear capability. We'll look forward to the Prime Minister explaining to the House of Commons this afternoon exactly what the British...
Britain was sidelined. The U.S. struck Iranian nuclear sites, and the U.K. was caught completely off guard. Farage exposed the most humiliating detail. The British Prime Minister had no idea it was coming. And Starmer's response? He called for de-escalation, yet in the same breath insisted Iran must never get nuclear weapons. The contradiction is staggering. How do you de-escalate while demanding an outcome that can only be enforced through strength? He does explain it, because he doesn't know how. This isn't diplomacy. It's dithering dressed up as leadership. Before we move on, let me ask, are you enjoying the video? If so, hit like, share, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth coverage of the seismic changes.
It sounds like an American attack could be imminent. Do you know what's going on?
Well, I don't think you should read into that an American attack is imminent.
He's calling the Security Council together.
We had a 2-hour discussion with the president last night on the Middle East, on this very issue. And as a result of that, the G7 statement came out very clear about the risk of the nuclear program in Iran, Israel's right to self-defense, and the need to de-escalate across the region, including in Gaza.
So you don't think an attack is in his mind, or US joining Israel? You don't think that's in his mind?
Well, the wording of the G7 statement, I think, speaks for itself. And I sat next to the president for that 2-hour discussion as we were working through not just the issues, but the statement itself.
So you're not worried about escalation?
I'm clear that we need to de-escalate.
Are you worried about escalation?
Of course I'm worried about escalation, which is why my focus is on de-escalation. I'm worried about escalation in the region.
When Starmer spoke, what followed was a masterclass in how not to lead during a crisis. Asked if he feared escalation, he dodged. Asked if he knew what Trump was planning, he replied, I sat next to him for 2 hours, as though physical proximity equals strategic insight. His delivery was robotic, his tone detached. Pressed again, he repeated the same line. I'm worried about escalation, which is why my focus is on de-escalation. It wasn't just empty, it was dangerously hollow. Here was a man trying to appear informed while clearly lost in the details. You could see it in the blinking, the stilted phrasing, the repetition. This wasn't leadership. It was a PowerPoint slide with a pulse.
No, but I mean, there's two things about that particular statement. I mean, firstly, obviously it showed Keir Starmer's complete ignorance about what the Americans' intentions were, and obviously gives an insight into what his real relationship with Donald Trump is, given Keir Starmer made very clear about how he was sitting next to Donald Trump at dinner, and still obviously had no idea what Donald Trump was planning. But there's also a more important point, which is, if you remember, we had this period of a week, as it were. There was the drumbeat, the build-up to American military action. And at that stage, one of the key things that Trump and others in the American administration were trying to do was to convince the Iranians that they were deadly serious about intervening, and coming as close as they could to basically saying, if you don't come to the negotiating table now and completely relinquish and abandon your nuclear program, then we are going to bomb you. And that was, in a sense, the final chance that the Iranians were given to act before the bombing commenced. Keir Starmer was actively undermining that strategy, because Keir Starmer was wandering around saying, "Oh, you don't need to worry. Donald Trump doesn't mean it. It's just noise. It's just the hawks in Washington just beating the drum. It's not really going to happen." So at the same time that Keir Starmer was basically calling for de-escalation, his words had the practical effect of undermining that strategy. And you can't have the British Prime Minister conducting foreign policy in complete ignorance, because this is the other thing. What is Keir Starmer's entire foreign policy based on? As I said on yesterday in my column, he's not acting as if he's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He's acting as if he's some sort of glorified global marriage guidance counselor. Yeah. Wants to position himself between, as he says, as the bridge between Europe and the United States. He wants to put himself as the deal maker between Trump and Zelensky. Here we've had him try to act as peacemaker between the United States and Iran. Right. But if you want to have that role, and you want to adopt that role, and you want to take that role on your
Hodges explained that Starmer's televised cluelessness wasn't just embarrassing, it was strategically dangerous. While the U.S. was building pressure on Iran with one final ultimatum, give up your nukes or face the consequences, Starmer was publicly undermining them. With every call for de-escalation, he chipped away at America's position. He gave Tehran an illusion that Britain wasn't fully aligned, making deterrence look divided and buying the enemy time to stall. Then Hodges said it outright. Starmer isn't acting like a prime minister. He tries to straddle the middle, first between Trump and Zelensky, now between Trump and Iran, pretending that fence-sitting equals peacekeeping. It doesn't. It projects weakness. It signals to the world that Britain is unsure, unfocused, and unserious. If you want to be a peacemaker, Hodges argued, you must carry the weight of that role. You can't float between sides like a moderator on a podcast. You have to own the strategy. And Starmer doesn't even seem to understand one exists.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They can shout as much as they like, but we all know the truth. We used to be a strategic player on the global stage, advancing Britain's interests with confidence, and now we are on the sidelines. Over the last few weeks, historic events unfolded in the Middle East, and at every stage, Britain has been out of step with the US and out of the loop with Israel. Last week, the Prime Minister came back from the G7, insisting that there was nothing that President Trump said that would indicate he was about to get involved in this conflict. Days later, the US launched its attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. He had no idea what was going on. The week before, Israel launched an attack on Iran, and it became apparent that the UK was not even informed about the attack in advance, despite us having been involved in previous preventative action. How is this standing up on the world stage? On Tuesday, the Foreign Secretary, a lawyer, repeatedly could not say whether the US strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities were legal. This is a government that doesn't know what it's doing. Let me make the Conservative position clear, Mr. Speaker. Iran has been a direct threat to the UK for years, plotting terrorism on British soil. It must not get nuclear weapons. And this is a time for Europe to step up, and the UK should be leading. Instead, we have an Attorney General using international law to constrain and restrict the UK while the Prime Minister hovers indecisively on the sidelines. What we need is a leader. Instead, we have 3 lawyers.
Kemi Badenoch exposed not just Starmer's confusion, but Britain's entire strategic collapse. She laid out the facts. We weren't informed about Israel's strike. We weren't consulted on U.S. action, and our intelligence networks have withered. And then came her most devastating line. What we need is a leader. Instead, we have 3 lawyers. She's right. Starmer's team isn't shaping global events. They're checking clauses. While America and Israel take risks, Britain under Starmer dithers. One central to world affairs. The UK is now little more than an afterthought in the email thread.
Yeah, I mean, I said in my column on Sunday, I wrote about it in April. I was out in Israel, and it was very clear from the briefing we were getting from Israeli sort of foreign office officials and intelligence officials and security officials that this was coming, and it wasn't a matter of if but when. And the fact that the Prime Minister and the government appear to have been so completely blindsided by this is very, very concerning. It doesn't matter what side of the political fence you sit on, and it doesn't frankly matter whether you think Britain should be supporting Israel and the United States or you think they should be opposing. One of the fundamental things that you expect from your government and is needed from a government is at least some sort of basic understanding about what your allies and enemies' intentions are, so you can actually formulate foreign policy and security and defense policy on some sort of knowledgeable basis. Keir Starmer throughout the last week quite clearly hasn't had a clue what's going on, and as you said, this isn't hindsight from his critics. I said last week, as soon as I saw that statement in which he'd said, "Oh, don't worry, Donald Trump's not going to get involved." Yeah. And I said at the time, that is a ridiculous hostage to fall.
Before any of this unfolded, Dan Hodges had already sounded the alarm. While in Israel, he was briefed by intelligence officials that a U.S. strike was imminent. Journalists knew. Security experts knew. But Starmer didn't. He stood in front of cameras and insisted Trump wouldn't act, only for Trump to act hours later. Hodges was blunt. This wasn't a bad headline. It was a failure of leadership at the highest level. A prime minister not only behind the curve, but publicly misrepresenting reality, not out of deceit, but out of ignorance. And that's the point. This isn't spin or partisan politics. It's reality. Britain saw exactly who Starmer is. A man unbriefed on what matters. A man who speaks without understanding. A man whose very words undermine our allies. He tried to mediate nuclear conflict as if it were a family squabble. In a moment of crisis, we didn't see neutrality, we saw absence. And in a world on fire, Britain cannot afford a prime minister who brings a fire extinguisher full of fog. So ask yourself, if Starmer misses crisis, what else will he miss? Should a PM's words weaken allies and embolden enemies? Can Britain trust a leader who never acts, only reacts? If you found this analysis important, like and share the video, and subscribe for more sharp insights into how politics is reshaping Britain's future. Until next time, stay tuned.